Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on this webinar today. My name's Andy Churley, and I'll be taking you through the hosting this webinar. And I'd like to introduce Gavin and Nathan from CentralNic. Before we go fully into the webinar itself and the content matter, I'll just take you through a few items of kind of housekeeping, etc. So today's topic will be looking at registry migration and the challenges and pitfalls of moving a registry from one back-end provider to another. And it's something that all registry operators should bear in mind when considering undertaking a change to their back-end. Your speakers today are Gavin Brown, who is the head of CentralNic Registry Services. Gavin's been working with CentralNic since 2001. He became Chief Technology Officer in 2005, and he has all responsibility for all aspects of CentralNic's Registry Services division and all technical elements of the integrated global reseller network. He's a highly respected figure in the domain industry and has authored a number of EPP protocols, for example, which have been published in and has been published in several professional technical journals, as well as participating in a number of technical public policy and advocacy groups. Our second speaker will be Nathan van Overloop. He is the CTO of CentralNic Registry, and he's been working on the registry side of the domain industry since 2013, where he co-created the architecture of a registry system. Nathan's energy and people skills has helped CentralNic in recent years become technical operations and support teams become some of the most respected in the industry. I will also be giving you a quick introduction to kick off. I'm Andy Churley, I'm head of marketing. So I handle all of the marketing elements for CentralNic Registry Services. And I've been working in the domain industry for well over 10 years now and have held positions in marketing and product, both in registry operators and registrars. And in product roles, I've actually developed online registrar and registry systems for a number of online companies. So what brought this webinar about actually was when we were discussing blog posts and theming them, and one of the things we started to talk about was nature's ability to undertake and see huge exodus of animals from one location to another. And the one that kind of jumps to many people's minds is the mass exodus of wildebeest along the Serengeti in multiple groups, some over 1 million strong. And these are known as megaherds, and they roam for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers over the Serengeti. But why do they do it? Well, simply they do it because they can no longer succeed in their current environment, and they are prepared to risk a multitude of dangers, such as drought, starvation, and they have to cross fast-flowing rivers and arid deserts, and they have to contend with a lot of other predators, such as lions and crocodiles. But they do this regularly to improve from the place that they can't really survive in any longer to a place where they can actually thrive. And that's what kind of spurred the topic for this this webinar today. The agenda for today is we'll give you this welcome introduction, and I'll give you a little bit of housekeeping, and I'll take you through the background to CentralNic and its experience in registry migrations. Then I'll hand over to Gavin, who will be talking about the causal factors and considerations when leading to registry migrations. And then Nathan will take over and actually go through the process of migration and the pitfalls and benefits of undertaking a migration if you're a registry operator. So let me take you through CentralNic very quickly. It's a very interesting development of a business. It's grown massively in the last few years, but it was founded in 1996, was listed on the stock exchange in 2013. We're headquartered in London, and we have customers in almost every country in the world. Our 2019 revenue closed at just over 109 million pounds, and we expect to be in the region of double that for 2020 revenues. So we've been working with and migrating registries to our registry platform for over 20 years. We currently, as a group, manage around 47 million domains, and we've grown very rapidly. I've been with the business for 4 years, and I was employee number 66, and we're now over 450 people. Many domain experts and professionals across many different disciplines in the domain industry are working with us now. And we are split into 5 divisions: Registry Services, which is the division for which we're presenting this webinar right now; Retail Registrars; Reseller Registrars; Brand Services, which is corporate registrar and brand protection businesses, as well as domain monetization. If we drill down a little bit and look at the CentralNic Registry, we are probably the oldest division within the group. We have just under 20 million domains under management. We have 160 top-level domains on our platform, and that includes all types of top-level domains, from CC-TLDs through to sponsored TLDs and .brands. We have, since 2017, we've been very successful in migrating over 55 TLDs to our platform. To give you a few stats on the scale of our registry operations, our EPP systems handle about 27 million transactions a day. Our Who is RDAP system does over 15.5 million queries a day. Our registry DNS platform has about 6 billion queries a day, and we have over, I think, just over 100 nodes on the network now. We've been very successful in operating DNS at 100% uptime for over 23 years now, and we have over 2,500 registrar accounts on our registry system. We do all this under ISO certifications for 27001, ISO 9001 and ISO 22301 to ensure that our registry customers are getting very well documented and disciplined registry systems that are developed in accordance with the best practices. To give you a little bit of an idea about our registry migration experience, we have a dedicated migration team. We've done, as I said, 55 registry migrations since 2007. We've migrated over 650,000 domains with no downtime outside of the ICANN SLA. The process that we use is very well proven, and our migrations projects are covered under the ISO 9000 certification that I mentioned earlier. When migrating registries from one backend provider to another, it's important to remember that registry migration is a one-time process. And so the complexity of the migration is only slightly related to the number of domains that are actually being migrated. And this is something that many registry operators don't really appreciate, is that the process of migration is probably more important than the number of domains that you're migrating, because if you can migrate one domain successfully, you can migrate 100,000 or 1 million. But there are other drivers for the complexity, which we'll be talking about later. Probably overriding everything else is the quality and integrity of the data that we, as a gaining registry platform, receive from the losing registry platform. What also adds complexity is the number of registrars that need to connect to the TLD, and the complexity of the string. For example, if it's an IDN, has complex registration requirements and things like that. So a successful migration really is very much rooted in the fact that we use tried and tested migration processes over and over again, and we modify them minimally in order to maximize the likelihood of success. In terms of CentralNic's expertise, we've performed more TLD migrations than any other registry service provider. And we've actually successfully migrated registries from all other major providers onto our platform. Under one migration, we've migrated over 2,700 registrar accounts for a single CCTLD. If you bear in mind what I was saying about things that add to complexity, the number of registrars is very much up there. So I will now be handing over to Gavin, who will be talking about the causal factors and considerations if you are a TLD leading to migration of your top-level domain to a different platform. Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. So why would a registry operator choose to migrate their top-level domain to a different service provider? There can be a number of reasons, and they can be operational, they can be financial, they can be commercial, or they can be technical. And we've dealt with registries who are choosing to move for all kinds of reasons, all of the reasons I've just mentioned. We've dealt with registries who have difficult operational complexities to deal with, where some of the kind of key functions of any registry operator weren't being provided by their existing provider, and they needed to reduce the cost of operations by outsourcing those functions to a new provider. We have clients who are looking to commercially grow their registry, and so are looking for a partner who can provide them a commercial basis to grow, and access to a larger channel of registrars. And we also have dealt with registry operators who've been operating their TLD in-house, perhaps using developed software that they've maintained themselves, or which they maybe purchased some time ago and haven't had developed, and which is starting to show its age and is deterring registrars from participating in their registry program, or even is subject to security issues that pose a threat to the stability of the registry system itself. We've had to deal with registry clients in all of those kind of scenarios. What are the considerations to think about when you're making a decision to move? One of the important things, especially if you are using probably the only really an issue if you are using a third-party service provider, is how you gracefully exit the contract with your existing provider. So many different registry service providers are available, and they offer a variety of different contractual models. Some of them can be quite difficult and challenging to get out of. There may be payments that you have to make. There may be careful notice periods that you need to be very careful around contract renewal to make sure that the timings are all correct. And the advice we would offer is when you're making a decision to move to a new registry service provider, to make use of the legal expertise and the practical expertise of that provider to give you the advice you need to make sure that the exit process is as smooth as possible. Having supported migrations from almost every registry service provider in the market, we have more experience with dealing with these sort of legal challenges, as well as the operational challenges and technical challenges, and having access to someone with that experience can be really important. In terms of the migration process itself, it's important to understand the different roles of the participants in the migration. So there is the registry operator, who is at the center of the whole process. But there will be two registry service providers as well. There will be the incumbent registry service provider and the new registry service provider. And typically, the migration process, step by step, is managed by the new registry service provider. But that doesn't mean that the incumbent registry service provider, the RSP, doesn't have an important role to play. And often the cooperation of the current RSP for a top level domain is absolutely vital in a successful migration. The most important thing that they need to do is make sure that the data, the registry data that is going to migrate from one platform to the other is complete and accurate. Because if that's not the case, then it's not possible to migrate the top level domain without some loss of data, and that could include domain names stop resolving. It could mean there's a financial impact because, for example, the renewal status of a domain name might get lost, meaning that the registrars get renewals for free, or it might mean that the domains are placed in the wrong registrar account or have the wrong contact information. The new RSP who is receiving that data obviously has to make sure that they can completely losslessly import that data into their system, so that the outcome of the migration process, at the end of that process, every single domain name resolves as well as it did before. All the WHOIS records match. There is a chain of trust from the secure entry point for the DNS, the root zone key, and that all services are up and running, and that registrars can manage their domain names, register new ones without having any difficulties or challenges. There can be some friction in this whole process. There are potentially competing priorities for the different parties. Obviously, the incumbent RSP has no incentive really to assist with an outbound migration, and making sure that they do cooperate and participate is absolutely essential to the success of the whole process. But the key mitigation for that is to make sure that the whole process is transparent and clear, and that the roles are identified, and the checkpoints where individual participants in the process know what's expected of them and when to deliver things. Thinking about registrars, one of the main reasons that the registry operators might wish to move their TLD is to expand the number of registrars they have access to. The registry service providers will have different subsets of the overall registrar population that they have connected to and are operating with already, and so it may be that one registry service provider can provide access to more registrars than another registry service provider, and that obviously allows the registry operator to pick a provider that will give them the most access to the most number of registrars. Of course, the challenge there is that the migration process itself is a disruptive event for registrars, and so it's important to make sure that the process is clear and transparent, and that registrars are given as much warning as possible. The registrars need to be able to work with the existing registry service provider. So if there's a gap, if your TLD is currently is currently connecting to registrars that your new registry service provider doesn't support, then they need to work hard to onboard those registrars, and they also need to make sure that the integration is complete, so that any specific features that your TLD supports, whether that's registry lock or IDN tables, are available with the new service provider, so that registrars can continue to offer them. It's important to understand that the registry migration process does require work on the half of the registrar, and that needs to be taken into account when the process is running. Thinking about the policy aspects to migration, generally it is better to try and keep as much in place as with the new provider as it is with the previous provider. Sometimes it can be an opportunity to review and simplify or clarify policies, especially if your new registry service provider has to do development work in order to accommodate custom policy rules, because obviously if you can simplify and streamline those processes, that will reduce the amount of time and potentially also the cost of having that custom development work done. But again, recognizing the importance of registrar engagement and registrar involvement, you want to make sure that your policies are as easy to use for a registrar point of view as possible, and that any changes you make are clearly communicated, and registrars have an opportunity to give feedback and to advise and to accommodate those changes in their own development roadmaps. There obviously are ICANN level policy considerations for migrating, and that includes communication with ICANN around material subcontracting arrangements. And since we often find that a registry migration takes place alongside a change of ownership of a top-level domain when it's been purchased from another incumbent registry operator, then there are careful considerations that need to be made about the timings of the changes, whether you complete the change of ownership before the migration or after, or trying to do it alongside. So having talked about some of the considerations, I'd like to hand over now to my colleague Nathan, who can talk about the step-by-step process that takes place on the technical side for a typical registry migration.
Thank you, Gavin. So we'll do a bit of a deep dive into the technical side of things and highlighting some of the most visible attention points. So if you look at the registry system as a whole, there are a couple of things that come out of the registry. You have, of course, the link between the domains and the registrants and the registrars that take care of these domains, but also out of the registry platforms come a DNS zone for that particular TLD. Together with that zone, we have also the DNSSEC chain of trust. And while we are migrating, we will freeze a couple of hours, we will freeze the lifecycle and the management of domains. However, there are portions of a registry platform that cannot be interrupted, DNS being the most visible one next to WHOIS. So if we talk about each of these components, it's important to understand that some of them can be interrupted for a certain time during the migration, and that's also why it's so important for the registrars to be aware when a certain migration starts and when a certain migration ends. For example, in terms of the registry database, if it would happen that within the process that data got corrupted, like Gavin mentioned, that could have considerable implications going further down the line. And how to mitigate most of them is to make sure that you follow a standardized registry data escrow deposit. For GTLDs, this is almost always the case. We just use the escrow deposits that are also the methodology for the emergency bureau to onboard a TLD. And while all of that doesn't have the financial data, it has the integrity of the system, and the integrity of that data set has been proven and checked. So that is, from our side of things, always the preferred methodology, if that is available. And in terms of risks that you have there, insufficient testing and ad hoc migration planning is definitely something that we learned over the course of the years, that having a very stable and a very straightforward and fixed migration plan is a lifesaver in these kind of situations. So that's why we also mention it there. DNS resolution. As the eventual and visible end product of the registry system, it's enormously important that whatever we receive as the last zone file from the previous RSP, that we compare that zone with our product of our registry system almost on a line-by-line basis. To account for any minor differences in the zone file is fine, but that is something that we do on every migration before we actually flip the switch and generate the first zone out. We make sure that that zone is 100% consistent. However, to achieve that on just the migration day, when it all needs to happen, again, robust testing process needs to be in place well before you start your work on the migration day. So again, that comes down to have a very solid migration plan. That's where the life saving happens. DNSSEC and the chain of trust is typically a bit trickier, but all the same, it's a well-proven methodology by now. Having gone through that process for more than 50 times, we know how to deal with that. And again, this comes down to making sure that you have adequate planning. Particular mention is there about the timing of those changes and to make sure that you have the rollover and the keys in place well before the migration date is there. And here we come back to the shared registry system itself and the unavailability of that system. And what we typically see is that an unavailability, if well informed for the registrar, is always a pain. However, if it's well informed before and the planning has been accurate, then for most registrars, they can account for that and queue up their internal work for some time. What we typically see is that on the migration day itself, registrars have to account for the switch to talk to the new registry operator system and switch their systems around. So again, communication and knowing an exact time on when the registry is flipping over from the old system to the new system is crucial. And when we go further down into the technical steps and considerations there, that will also come visible. The RDDS or WHOIS and RDAP is equally critical in terms of visibility to the outside world. While in migration, we always make sure that the WHOIS service is uninterrupted, and that also requires a careful planning beforehand to make sure that when the day comes, that the switch between the old WHOIS system and RDAP can be very fluent and can be done in a matter of minutes in terms of DNS caching and making sure that the system provides the exact same answers as the old system does. If we talk about the challenges that we typically face during a migration, we talked about the migration process itself. Although a well-defined process, if you go into CCTLDs and ad hoc migrations that we also have done, that is where the migration process typically can be challenging. And what we found over the years, that was very good to stick to our standard migration plan as much as possible, even though the source is different. The registrar onboarding is a crucial aspect of that, and it is typically the work of the registry operator to reach out to the registrars, making sure that they find their account on the CentralNic platform. If they have a preference for their domains to be attributed into a different account, for example, we have registrars that have two accounts with the same IANA number. If they have a preference, then they just need to let us know up front so that we can attribute the correct target account for their domains. And of course, the policy implementations. Talking again about the complexity of migration. What makes the migration more complex? In an ideal world, you would just take the TLD, take it, and put it on the new platform, and nothing would change other than the connection for the EPP system where the registrars need to point their system to. And in the number of complexity attributions in here, we have, for example, very specific registration requirements. And especially if these change alongside of a migration. The number of registrars, if the registry operator has to reach out to a lot of registrars, it makes it the time and the lead time definitely much longer, because those registrars, most of the time, they are already on the CentralNic platform, given that we have such a broad connection of registrars. But sometimes we find new registrars that need to be onboarded for a very specific CCTLD, and they need the time to test their systems through and through. Very specific registry product like registry logs, premium names that are handled in a different way. For example, changes in lifecycle handling. What I mean by that is, when are the names exactly removed from the zone? If we look at the lifecycle, that is typically a case where some of the registrars get confused in, wow, in the previous system, my domain was still in the zone, and now all of a sudden I see that that's domain name is all of a sudden disappearing from the zone. How to reduce those risks? It's very important that there is a very close collaboration between the incumbent and the new registry platform provider. They are basically at the source of the success of a registry migration, because they are utterly dependent on a sequence of steps to be carried out in a very straightforward way. And if they fail to do that, that's where you typically get in trouble. Comprehensive testing, making sure that the platform absolutely does the same as it was doing before. So that all leads into a very solid migration process. Well, we also ask for the other RSP is to make sure that we receive enough samples of the data so that we, prior to the migration and close to the migration, that we can verify that our processes work, and that we test that typically like a month before when we receive the first dump. Just load the dump in a development system, see that it looks all right, that the zone file is the same, and then 2 weeks before, just making sure that we capture any changes in between, and then a week before, and then the day before. Key in all of this is registrar communications, and consistent registrar communications directly from the RSPs themselves. Hey, this TLD is migrating off the platform, and also from the registry operator to directly inform his registrars, like, hey, we are migrating, this is the target date that we envision. Typically more than 60 days away, depends on the RA. Make sure that there is plenty of time for onboarding by the registrar. Test environments, absolutely critical for the registrars to make sure that they can onboard their processes, that they can onboard the changes if there are any, and the documentation that you publish in terms of operational manual and so forth and so forth. Again, on the policies, make it easy to onboard, like Evan mentioned, and update only in order to meet best practice. If we then take a look at the exact migration strategy, so where we typically start is that the incumbent RSP is notified by its registry operator in terms of, hey, we want to switch backends, and all the policy work in terms of cancellation of the contracts and all of those are basically starting. Then there is typically a meeting with between the two backend operators to talk about the specific details of this migration. what does our rollback plan look like? How will the losing RSP provide the data? Making sure that we get a secure channel in which that data that contains also all the private data can be exchanged between the two platforms in a secure manner. Fix on a migration date and hour. Talk about differences in billing processes. We know that, for example, that we have a typical billing process that is deviating from most of what other registry operators do. So how can we account for that? How can we make sure that we provide a consistent billing to the registry operator, but also that it is clear to the registrars on how this will be dealt with? And as you can see there, you have there 3 times a green sticky with communications to the registrar. I first had it on 1 sticky with multiple arrows, but I just wanted to highlight. This is the key thing about the migration, making sure that everyone is aware on what is happening and when it's happening. So the moment that all the 3 parties agree, the registry operator and the 2 RSPs, that's basically when the plan gets set in motion. For a GTLD, the middle step in terms of development work needed, that is typically not needed. If it is a GTLD, we have the standard processes in place and it's just like a walk in the park. This can vary, however, for very specific backends. And then basically we start the migration works between the 2 registry operator, which goes unnoticed until the migration day. So all of this work and making sure that we have the whois and the status codes mapped and the IANA ID to the particular CentralNic IDs, validation of the output of the whois, switching the DNS provider, making sure that we are prepared for the DNSSEC rollover. All of that work is basically completely transparent. And that's the way it's supposed to be. When all of that work is done, we have a checkpoint between the registry operator and the 2 RSPs to make sure, are we go or no go for launch? If there is a problem with continuing with migration, again, communication to the registrars. Then we come to the migration day. And again, we load in the data in our test environment to make sure that when we do this on production, we don't encounter any problems. We check again that the results look like we expected. Is the who is correct? Are the zones complete and valid? Don't we see any problems with DNSSEC? If any of that fails, we are basically in a rollback scenario, and then we communicate again with the incumbent RSP and with the registry operator and find a plan to continue, and basically communicate again to the registrar. The moment that all of those checks passes, then we basically launch the TLD internally, open it up to the registrars if it is an open TLD, and basically we notify all the registrars of the changed ROIDs. And that there is some cleanup after that between the 2 RSPs, but that's not so important. Over to you, Gavin.
Thank you, Nathan. So, yeah, I'd like to just bring this to a conclusion. We are running a little bit over, but we'll try and move things quickly. Just want to talk a little bit about a case study about one of the TLDs that we've migrated, which is SKNIC. Now, if you may be aware, SKNIC is now a part of CentralNic Group, but at the time migration took place, it was a client of ours. SKNIC had been operating on a ancient legacy platform that didn't have any form of API. And they had over 2,700 registrars who were using screen scraping tools to register and manage domain names. They had a program of modernization that included policies and billing, as well as the technology behind them. And we worked with them to upgrade their software to the CentralNic Registry software. And as part of that, migrated all of the data, including all 2,700 registrar accounts and over 360,000 domain names, in the course of a short period on 1 calendar day in 2017. The experience of that was incredibly useful, especially with the kind of helping us understand the importance of registrar communication. As you might imagine, with the number of registrars we're talking about, the amount of communication and the timing and the support and hand holding that registrars needed in order to accommodate that change was pretty substantial. Many of these registrars had never used EPP at all, and had no experience with it. So we had to help them find the right place to do software development, the documentation they would need. We needed to point them towards the sort of modules that they might need to install in their cPanel or WHMCS or parallel systems, and we also needed to support those registrars who, for whatever reason, were still manually registering domain names, and that involved training them on how the new system worked, how they could register and manage domain names using the new system. So, conclusions. There are a number of benefits to switching registry service provider. They can be simple commercial ones. The new service provider might be cheaper. They might be more nuanced in that you're looking to achieve a better channel distribution or working with a partner who better suits the kind of ambitions of your organization. But there are also risks, especially around the technical side of things. And Nathan's pointed out the importance of a careful process in having it being in place to make sure that migration is smooth and non-disruptive. There are a number of considerations across billing and pricing that also need to be taken into account. And the essential thing to do is to plan in advance and know what you're doing, and aim before you shoot. And I think any registry service provider that can provide a good service for its clients in doing this migration will have a good plan in place and will be able to provide it to a prospective client very easily, because it would be a standard part of their toolkit. So with that, I think we'll bring the presentation to an end. Andy, do we have any questions?
We do. Yes, we've had quite a few questions come in. So thank you everyone for contributing. Some of them fall into kind of little themes. So if I start off with the first one, this is a question that falls into several parts really. So Nathan, can I ask you, how long does a typical migration take?
So if you look at the preparation, like laid out in the document in the presentation, you're looking at a minimum of 38 days. But if you look at the practical migration, that's typically something that is delivered under 4 hours. We typically set aside a 4-hour window for a TLD that is under 1 million domains, but typically under 4 hours.
And so what's the actual shortest time that you've actually completed a migration?
So the shortest one that we actually did was almost on a 2 days basis, where we were in preparation of a migration, and all of a sudden there was a critical problem with the secondment payroll. So at that point in time, we basically had to do a scoop of the data we already had and basically load it as quickly as possible in the registry system and bring it online on the CentralNic platform to avoid further damage to the TLD itself. Of course, this goes into all what I've said before in terms of communication and preparation, making sure everyone is aware. So that needed a lot of care after that.
Thank you, Nathan. And here's a question for Gavin. If you could reiterate the common pitfalls that make migrations harder for registrars.
Certainly, yeah. So the most obvious thing is not giving them enough time and warning. And any migration planning process should give due account to the amount of time that the registrars need to prepare. Changes to the kind of configuration or behavior of the TLD can also cause issues. There are always going to be implementation differences between registry service providers, but if you're going to kind of compound that by changing the rules, the way your TLD operates, or maybe making big changes to things like pricing, then that's going to cause problems for registrars and need to be avoided.
Thank you. And Nathan, in terms of migrating CCTLDs, or in fact any TLDs, what is kind of the minimum data set that you need to actually perform that migration?
Typically, the more concrete and the better the data is, the easier this gets. We had had a migration previously in which the only thing that was really there from a CCTLD was the zone file. And we were able to create a system that basically takes a zone file, have an Excel on the side on which they had some documentation of some domains, and transform that into a registry system. And then the registrar, the only registrar that they had then the opportunity to basically correct the data. So if you look at like the almost minimum data set that we have is a zone file. We can start from a zone file if really needed.
Yeah, and then we have a question in about .blog. So some of the participants may be unaware of what happened with the migration of .blog, which made it quite challenging. So, Gavin, could I ask you to just spend a couple of minutes just to describe the situation and what the issues were? And Nathan, if you could then follow up and explain what it was we did in order to mitigate the situation. Gavin, you're on mute.
Of course I am. It had to be someone, right? I have to admit that I wasn't actually directly involved in the migration of .blog, and Nathan probably can talk about this in a lot more detail. .blog was a challenge for us, and I would say it was a learning opportunity. And I think a lot of what a lot of the material we've talked about during the course of this presentation has come from our experience. Some of it has come directly from our experience of .blog. What I wouldn't want to talk too much about some of the technical challenges we had. I think it would be better for Nathan to talk about those because he'll probably know from being involved directly in it at the time.
So .blog was a fairly standard migration for us. I think what we were presented with .blog, the problem was that it wasn't so much that the number of domains was very high, but it was the amount of data that was provided in the escrow deposit that was basically quite problematic. It had a couple of inconsistencies that when we tested that before, we didn't really have problems in loading it in production. We did have some problems loading it in the test environments due to the size of the deposit. And one of the things that we really changed after that is making sure that we have the environments to basically take on enormously big migrations. It was really a change in the hardware and in software that we had to go through in order to make sure that as a registry backend that we are ready to just take on huge TLDs in terms of amount of data. We also made sure that the process that we used in order to take data in the system has been basically split up. It used to be a monolithic process, take the contacts in, take the domains in, take the statuses, take the name servers in. And we basically started splitting that process up so we can do that in a parallel way over multiple servers and basically feed that as quickly as possible into the registry system. One of the things more noticeable about the blog was also a change in the way that we communicate to the registrar, especially when things go wrong, and how our standard responses are, and that's basically also governed by our ISO policies, and a change in those policies, like when do we start communicating and how long do we then postpone the next notice to our registrars.
Thank you, Nathan. Well, I'm having some button issues here today. We've had a question in from a registrar that says, you mentioned notifying registrars in plenty of time, but in the workflow model, which we have here, they didn't see any handling of the case of a registrar that elects not to support the change. Is there a standard workflow for this?
I can answer that question. So this is a fairly recent development that we've started seeing with some of the inbound migrations that we have in our pipeline. It's not, so we are still developing our approach to dealing with these issues. One of the things that we have, a benefit that we have as being part of a wider group, is that our group includes a number of registrars that act as resellers, and almost every registrar who is currently selling domains in the GTLD space, and it may be connected to us directly, is also connected to one of our reseller registrars, whether that's OneAPI or Hexanet as it's known, or Key Systems RP proxy platform, or PartnerGate, or one of the other smaller registrar platforms, reseller registrar platforms. So in those sorts of situations, we have a number of things that we can do to support the registrar. If they would like to maintain the customers for those domains and just allow them to renew and keep the customers, then we can transfer those domains into one of our registrar accounts. And the registrar can pick them up through their account with OneAPI or RRP proxy. There are some situations where registrars decide that they actually would prefer not to carry the domain at all, and that's unfortunate. But obviously, it's their entire prerogative to do so. Where we need to, we will transfer the domains away to a new registrar, and we can assist the registry operator in selecting the appropriate registrar to do that. But obviously, to me, this seems to be it's almost an opportunity as well. So the registry operator who's faced with a situation where a registrar is declining to continue to support their TLD, the likelihood is that that's going to be for commercial reasons. And if you're a commercially oriented TLD, that's a challenge for you to step up to and to prove the commercial viability of your TLD. And so you can set yourself a deadline, maybe 6 months or a year or however long down the line after your migration, to go back to that registrar and say, look, here are all the things that I said that I would do 6 months ago when we migrated, and look at how well we're performing now. Look how well our new RSP is helping us, and all the things that we can offer you as a registrar to create a product that is differentiatable and that customers will want and will continue to use and renew and buy value-added products for.
Thank you, Gavin. We've got one final question, and we're going to have to unfortunately close the doors. And seeing as I've made you two work quite hard up until now, I'll field this one just to give you a bit of a breather. So the questions come in. It says, what reasons do your customers give for choosing to migrate their domains onto your platforms? And I think it falls into probably about 5 different distinct reasons. One is the fact that we already have a large number of very well-known customers, and they act as extremely powerful client references. So we're quite happy to put potential customers of ours to go and talk to any of our registry operators. Many of them have been with us for a long period of time, since the kickoff of new GTLDs and for some of the CCTLDs, etc. before that. And they're always very open and will not hesitate from giving the good and the bad, and we wouldn't expect anything else. The second is our experience, and you've seen the number of migrations that we've done over the recent years. We have an extremely experienced registry crew, both at operating at a technical level, building some of the world's best registry software, and with the supporting services such as policy, marketing, etc. Third is the services and support, both in fact I covered this, but services and support, both technical and commercial. It's not just the experience that we have in the team, it's the breadth with depth of these services and support that really give registry operators a good deal of confidence and security when they're working with us. I think from a fourth reason is actually our infrastructure, including, for example, what I consider to be a world-class DNS network. We had some stats on it earlier on. We have over 100 nodes. We've had 23 continuous years of 100% uptime, and we operate at sub 1% capacity. So we have extremely good DDoS protection, and our registry customers come on board for that, partly for that reason alone. And then finally, I'd say it's our connectivity and distribution. We connect with probably the largest registrar base of any TLD backend operator. And that allows us, coupled with our expertise and our support services, to leverage that experience with the registrar distribution network, as well as to help us maybe tame some of the rather wilder ideas that some registry operators have in terms of how to operate a TLD, so that we don't fall into conflict with the registrar channel. We're a big believer in helping our channel distribute the TLDs that we've got, rather than telling them how to distribute the TLDs that we've got. And that was my fifth and final point. And at this stage, we're right at the top of the hour now. So thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to welcoming you to what we hope is going to be a series of very interesting webinars, both now and into the new year. Thank you very much, and thank you for your attention. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.